The story begins with the sound of harsh whispers that cut deeper than any blade. A young woman, tall and broad-shouldered, stands in the middle of her family's small home, her hands trembling as she holds the only bundle of belongings she's allowed to take with her. Her relatives, worn down by poverty and hardened by pride, glare at her as though she's some beast that takes too much from the table and gives nothing back. "She's too big to keep," one aunt mutters. "Eats like two men and looks like she should be out wrestling oxen instead of sitting here." The words sting, but they are not new. She has heard them all her life, yet today they are final. Today she is being cast out. She tries to reason with them, offering to work harder, to take less food, to prove her worth. But the elders only shake their heads. To them, her size is not just a physical trait, but a shame, a sign that she does not fit the mold of what a woman should be. Small, dainty, easily controlled. They see her height and strength as monstrous rather than a blessing. With no more to say, she steps out into the cold morning, clutching her small bundle of clothes, a threadbare blanket, and a loaf of stale bread. The door slams behind her, and the sound echoes like a final judgment. Alone now, she walks the dirt road away from the only place she has ever known. The land stretches endlessly, golden fields bending in the wind, hills rising like waves in the distance. It is beautiful, but she cannot feel the beauty. Her chest is too heavy with grief. As she walks, memories surface unbidden. Children pointing at her broad back in the market, men laughing that no husband would want a woman who could lift heavier sacks than they could, women whispering that she was cursed. She remembers lowering her head, hiding her hands, wishing she could fold herself into something smaller, more acceptable. But she is not small. She is tall, strong, and broad-hipped. And in a world that only values women for their softness and frailty, she has always felt like an intruder in her own skin. The road grows long, and hunger gnaws at her stomach. She tries to ration the bread, but ends up eating more than she planned, cursing herself for the appetite that has always marked her as too much. By midday, her legs ache, and by nightfall, she collapses under the stars, curling in her blanket, whispering to herself that she will not cry. But tears come anyway, hot and unrelenting. In that moment, under the vast sweep of the prairie sky, she feels smaller than she ever has before, yet also painfully aware of her size. Too big to be loved, too big to be kept, too big to belong. And so, her journey begins not with hope, but with rejection. She does not yet know that the very things she has been taught to hate about herself, her strength, her presence, her resilience, are the very gifts that will one day save not only herself, but the man whose heart is waiting for her. For now, all she knows is loneliness. She walks on, one step at a time, unaware that fate has already set a cowboy's path to cross with hers, and that soon, someone will see her not as too big, but as exactly enough. The prairie stretched endlessly, a sea of grass that waved like rippling water under the late afternoon sun. The young woman trudged along the dirt road that wound across it, her feet blistered, her body aching from days of walking. She had eaten the last of her bread the night before, and now her stomach twisted with emptiness. Each step grew heavier, and though she tried to push herself forward, a part of her wondered if she should simply lie down in the tall grass and let the world forget her. At last, her body betrayed her. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed by the roadside, dust clinging to her face as her vision blurred. She whispered a prayer, though to whom, she wasn't sure, that her suffering might end quickly. Sleep, dark and heavy, began to pull her under. But fate had other plans. Riding down the road on a sturdy bay horse was a cowboy returning from town. His name was Eli Turner, a man with weather-worn skin and steady eyes that missed little. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from years of working cattle, enduring storms, and living by his own two hands. Life on the frontier had taught him to recognize trouble when he saw it, and what he saw lying crumpled in the dust was more than just trouble. It was someone in need. "Whoa, Dusty," he murmured, pulling his horse to a halt. Swinging down, Eli approached the figure. At first, he thought it might be a fallen ranch hand. Her size was striking, her shoulders broad, her frame built with undeniable strength. But as he crouched beside her, he realized she was a young woman. Her face, though pale with exhaustion, was soft and striking. Strands of dark hair clung to her cheeks, and her lips were cracked from thirst. "Miss?" he said gently, shaking her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" She stirred faintly, eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she saw only the sky and the silhouette of a man leaning over her. Fear sparked in her chest. What if he mocked her as others had, or worse, took advantage of her helplessness? But she had no strength left to resist. Eli saw the fear in her eyes and quickly raised his hands. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you. Looks like you've had a hard go. Let me help." His voice carried no judgment, only calm assurance. Something about it eased the tightness in her chest. With gentle care, Eli lifted her into his arms. She was heavy, but he bore the weight easily, carrying her as though it were the most natural thing in the world. He laid her across his horse, making sure she was steady before climbing up behind her. As they rode toward his ranch, she drifted in and out of consciousness. She caught glimpses of the horizon, the warmth of his coat as he wrapped it around her, the sound of his steady voice humming a low tune meant to keep her calm. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. By the time they reached his small homestead, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold. Eli carried her inside, placing her on a bed near the fire. He fetched water, coaxing her to drink, then prepared a simple meal of stew and bread. She tried to protest weakly, ashamed to take from him, but he silenced her with a firm shake of his head. "Don't you worry about that now. You just rest. You're safe here." For the first time since she was cast out, she felt a flicker of warmth in her chest, not just from the fire, but from the kindness of a stranger who saw her not as too big, not as a burden, but simply as someone worth saving. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, leather, and stew simmering in a pot. It was small but warm, with sturdy walls that kept out the prairie winds. When she awoke, the woman found herself lying on a soft bed layered with quilts, the fire crackling nearby. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. No one had ever cared enough to lay her down gently, to make sure she was warm, to leave food within reach. Her eyes fluttered toward the corner of the room, where the cowboy sat mending tack by lamplight. He looked up as soon as he heard her stir. His face broke into a quiet smile, not mocking, not pitying, just relief that she had woken. "You're awake," he said simply, setting aside the leather straps. "That's a good sign." She struggled to sit, her body heavy with exhaustion, but he moved quickly to steady her with a hand on her shoulder. "Easy now. You've been through hell by the looks of it. No need to push yourself. I shouldn't be here," she whispered, her throat raw. "Why's that?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'll just take up too much space," she muttered, the old shame rising. "You don't have room for someone like me." Eli frowned, his brow furrowing. "Space? You think I measure a person's worth by the size of a cabin? Or the size of them?" He shook his head. "Not here. Not with me." Her cheeks flushed, both at his words and at the kindness behind them. She lowered her gaze, unused to hearing anything other than criticism. "Here," he said softly, lifting a bowl of stew from the hearth. The savory smell made her stomach twist with hunger, but she hesitated, afraid of taking too much. He pressed the spoon into her hand. "Eat! You need it more than I do." The first bite nearly broke her. It was warm, hearty, and full of flavor, so different from the stale bread she'd been gnawing. Tears stung her eyes, and she quickly turned her face away so he wouldn't see. But Eli noticed. He noticed everything. "You've been without kindness for too long," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "Nobody should cry over a hot meal. Not here." She looked at him then, studying the lines of his face, the steadiness in his gaze. He didn't look at her the way others did. There was no ridicule in his eyes, no disgust, only concern. The next few days passed in a rhythm she could hardly believe. Eli gave her space to rest, yet always made sure she had food, water, and warmth. When she tried to insist she could leave, he reminded her that healing came first. He never pried into her past, though his eyes carried the weight of curiosity. He let her share only what she chose, respecting her silence. One afternoon, when she managed to rise and step outside, she found the prairie stretching endlessly before her, bathed in golden light. Eli stood nearby, mending a fence, but he looked up and smiled as if her being there, just standing in the sunlight, was reason enough to be glad. It unsettled her. How could he not see what everyone else had? How could he stand there, so calm, so steady, treating her as though she belonged? That night, lying under his quilts, she realized she was both grateful and afraid. Grateful for his care, afraid that it couldn't last. Afraid that once he realized who she was, what she was, he would send her away, just like the others. But for now, in that small cabin filled with warmth, she allowed herself something she hadn't felt in years, the faint, fragile spark of hope. The first days at Eli Turner's ranch blurred together like a half-remembered dream. The young woman, still too shy to even speak her full name aloud, grew stronger under his care. Her cheeks regained color, her step grew steadier, and the hollowness in her eyes softened each time he set a meal before her or insisted she rest by the fire. Yet with every kindness came a pang of unease. She had learned long ago that kindness was fleeting. People offered it only until they saw her clearly, saw the width of her shoulders, the breadth of her hips, the way she filled a doorway. Then, like clockwork, the smiles would vanish, replaced by whispers and laughter. One morning, when she woke to find Eli already outside tending to the cattle, the thought struck her like a whip. She was overstaying her welcome. She sat up in bed, the quilt slipping from her shoulders, and looked around the small cabin. The walls were close, the furniture built sturdy but modest. Everything had its place, and now she was here taking up space that was not hers. A wave of shame rolled over her. "I can't stay," she murmured to herself, clutching the blanket. Not here. Not with him. That day she tried to keep busy. She swept the floor, washed the dishes, and folded the quilts. When Eli returned, sweat on his brow and dust clinging to his shirt, he paused in the doorway. His eyes took in the neat cabin, then settled on her. "You've been working," he said. "I can't just sit and do nothing," she replied quickly. "I don't want to be a burden." Eli tilted his head, studying her with that calm gaze that always unsettled her. "You're not a burden," but the words rang hollow to her ears. People had said that before, always before reminding her that she was in fact too much. Too much to feed, too much to house, too much to love. That night, while Eli mended gear by the fire, she quietly gathered her few belongings. She waited until he was distracted, then slipped toward the door. Her hand trembled on the latch, her heart hammering. Leaving hurt, but staying felt dangerous. Dangerous to her heart, dangerous to the fragile hope that whispered she might belong. Going somewhere? His voice cut through the room. She froze. Slowly she turned. He sat with the leather still in his hands, his eyes calm but steady, fixed on her. I don't belong here," she stammered. "I've taken enough. You've done more than anyone ever has for me, but I can't stay." He set down the leather, rose, and crossed the room in a few easy steps. Standing before her, he wasn't angry. He wasn't mocking. His voice, when he spoke, was low and even. "You think you're not welcome because of your size, don't you?" The words cut through her like a blade. Her eyes filled with tears, and she could only nod. Eli's expression softened. "Listen to me. Your size isn't a flaw. It's not something to be ashamed of. You're strong. You're capable. I've seen the way you hold yourself, even when the world's tried to break you. That's not a burden. That's worth more than most folks will ever understand." Her lips trembled, but the old doubts screamed louder. "You don't mean that." "You'll see soon enough. Everyone does." Eli shook his head. "No. I've seen enough already to know you're not like everyone else. And that's exactly why you belong here." The words lodged in her chest, strange and heavy. She wanted to believe them, wanted to reach out and cling to them. But belief was dangerous. Hope was dangerous. So she lowered her gaze and whispered, "I don't know if I can believe you." Eli didn't press. He only touched her arm gently, steady as the earth beneath her feet. Then stay long enough to see that I mean every word. That night she lay awake staring at the rafters, her heart aching. For the first time, someone hadn't pushed her away. Yet the shadows of insecurity still pressed in, whispering she was unworthy. It was a war inside her, the memory of cruelty battling against the possibility of love, and she didn't yet know which side would win. The days on Eli's ranch stretched into a rhythm that felt almost like life before her exile, except it was different, softer, more bearable. She rose with the dawn, helped where she could, and found herself slowly regaining strength. Yet every evening, when the chores were done and the fire cast long shadows across the cabin walls, the old voices crept back. Too big, too much. Not wanted, Eli noticed. He always noticed. One evening, after a long day repairing fences, they sat across from each other at the table. A lantern burned low between them, casting a warm glow over his weathered face and her nervous hands twisting in her lap. She had eaten heartily, something she never allowed herself before, but now she shifted uneasily, ashamed of how much she had taken. "You're quiet tonight," Eli said. His voice calm but probing, she forced a smile. "Just tired, I suppose. That so?" He leaned back, folding his arms. "Funny thing, though, you look more like someone carrying a load that don't belong to them." Her heart stuttered. She tried to look away, but his steady gaze held her still. "I know that look," he continued softly. "It's the look of someone waiting to be told they ain't enough, or worse, that they're too much." The words landed like a stone in her chest. "Because that's what I am," she whispered before she could stop herself. "Too much. Too tall, too strong, too big. That's all anyone ever sees." Silence stretched between them. The crackle of the fire filled the gap until Eli pushed back his chair and rose. He came around the table and crouched before her, his calloused hands resting on his knees. His eyes met hers, clear, unflinching, and full of something she could hardly recognize. "Then they're blind," he said firmly. "Blind as bats in a coal mine." She blinked, startled. "What? You think your size is something to hide? I don't. I see a woman who's strong enough to stand when others would have fallen. A woman who's weathered storms most couldn't survive. I see someone who looks me square in the eye, instead of shrinking down like she ought to be, less than she is." Her throat tightened. "You don't mean that." He gave a soft, almost sad smile. "Darling, I mean every word. You've been carrying lies folks told you for so long you've forgotten they ain't true." The word darling struck her like a spark. Gentle, unexpected, and dangerous. No one had ever spoken to her that way. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but her doubts clawed at her still. "Eli," she whispered, shaking her head. "You don't know me." "Not really. If you did—" "I know enough," he interrupted, his voice steady. "I know what I see, and I see a woman worth more than every whisper that ever tried to tear her down." Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to speak, but the lump in her throat silenced her. All she could do was meet his gaze, searching for any sign of jest, of pity, of anything less than truth. But there was none. Finally, he reached out, not to grab her, but to rest a hand lightly over hers. His palm was warm, his grip steady. "I don't care what they said about you. To me, you're not too much. You're just right. And if you'll let me, I'll prove it to you." Her heart thundered, torn between disbelief and a dangerous flicker of longing. Could it be true? Could someone see her, not as too big, not as a burden, but as a woman worth holding close? She pulled her hand back gently, overwhelmed, and whispered, "I don't know if I can believe you." Eli nodded once, accepting her hesitation without anger. "Then I'll wait," he said simply. "And every day I'll keep showing you till you do." That night, she lay awake again under the quilts, her heart racing not from shame, but from something far more terrifying. Hope. After Eli's confession, his words lingered in her mind like embers refusing to die out. Not too much. Just right. She replayed them again and again, but each time the shadows of doubt whispered louder. "He's only saying that because you're broken, because he pities you." So she decided she had to prove herself. Prove that she was not a burden. Prove that she could be useful. not just another mouth to feed or body to shelter. If Eli truly saw value in her, she would show him with her hands, her back, and her strength. The very next morning, she rose before dawn. The cabin was still dark, Eli asleep in the other room when she slipped outside into the crisp air. The ranch was quiet, except for the soft lowing of cattle in the distance. She inhaled deeply, squaring her shoulders. Today she would work. Her first task was hauling water from the well. The bucket was heavy, the rope stiff from the morning chill, but her muscles, long unused, remembered the effort. She carried it back without spilling a drop. She set it down just as Eli emerged from the barn, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He paused at the sight of her. "You're up early?" "I can work," she said firmly. "I want to." He studied her, then gave a slow nod. "All right, then. Let's see what you got." So they worked side by side. She lifted feed sacks nearly as heavy as herself, carrying them across the yard while Eli watched with a mixture of surprise and respect. She mucked the stalls without complaint, her strong arms making the work quicker than he expected. When a skittish horse pulled at its reins, she moved forward with a calm steadiness that soothed the animal where even Eli's touch had faltered. By midday, sweat slicked her brow, her muscles ached, but a strange sense of pride filled her chest. She was not shrinking from the work. She was thriving in it. When Eli handed her a tin cup of water, his eyes shone with something more than gratitude. "You've got grit," he said, his voice warm. "Most folks wouldn't last half a day keeping pace with me." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Maybe I'm not most folks. The word surprised her as much as him. For once, she didn't feel the need to apologize for being strong. But still, that evening, when the chores were done, the doubts returned. She sat outside on the porch, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. Eli joined her, lowering himself onto the step beside her. "You don't have to prove yourself to me," he said quietly, as though reading her thoughts. She tightened her grip on her knees. "But I do. All my life I've been told I'm too big, too much. If I don't prove I'm useful, what else is there?" Eli turned to her, his expression steady. "There's plenty more. You've got strength, sure, but you've also got heart. I've seen the way you care for the animals, the way you work without complaint. You don't have to earn your place here. You've already got it." His words warmed her, but she wasn't ready to accept them. Not fully. Still, deep inside, a fragile seed of belief had been planted. Maybe she was more than the cruel voices said. Maybe Eli truly saw her as she was. Not too much, but enough. That night, as she lay in the small cabin bed, her muscles aching in a satisfying way, she realized something startling. She wanted to stay. Not just to prove herself, but because, for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged, and she had no idea that soon fate would test that strength in a way that would change everything. The prairie had a way of turning from calm to chaos in the span of a heartbeat. One morning, as the sun barely crested the horizon, the air was heavy, restless, charged with a tension that even the animals could feel. The cattle bellowed nervously, hooves shifting in the dirt. The horses stamped in their stalls, ears flicking. Eli stepped out of the barn, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sky to the west was dark, boiling with clouds that stacked higher and higher, rolling toward the ranch like an army on the march. He muttered under his breath. "Storm's coming." She stood nearby, carrying a basket of kindling, and followed his gaze. Her heart tightened. She'd seen storms before, sharp bursts of rain that passed quick enough. But this sky looked mean, alive. "What do we do?" she asked. Eli's jaw tightened. "We get ready. Cattle need driving to higher ground before the floodplain fills. Horses secured. This'll be a fight." He didn't need to ask if she'd help. She was already setting the basket down, rolling up her sleeves. The wind began to howl as they worked. The cattle, spooked by the changing air, pushed against the fences. Together, she and Eli opened the gates and began driving the herd uphill. It was grueling work. Rain started in heavy sheets, soaking her hair, plastering her dress against her body. Mud sucked at her boots, and the cattle resisted, panicked and bawling. Eli rode ahead, cutting off stragglers, but even on horseback he struggled against the storm. She waded in on foot, her broad frame steady where others might have been knocked down. She shouted, waved her arms, and drove the cattle forward, her voice carrying even over the thunder. At one point, a calf broke from the group, bleeding as it stumbled toward a ditch where water was rising fast. Without hesitation, she sprinted after it, mud flying under her boots. She caught the calf just as it lost its footing, heaving it up into her arms. Her muscles screamed, but she held tight, wading back through the muck until she set it down safely on firmer ground. Eli saw it all from horseback, his heart thudding, not just from the danger, but from the sight of her strength and determination. She was a force, steady and unyielding where many men would have faltered. By the time the last of the herd was secured on high ground, night was falling and the storm had not relented. They stumbled back toward the ranch, drenched to the bone, exhausted but alive. The fences had held, the herd was safe, and the horses were sheltered. Against the fury of the storm, they had won. Inside the cabin, as Eli lit the fire and she wrung out her hair, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. Finally, Eli broke it. "You saved that calf's life, and truth be told, mine too. Couldn't have done it without you." She lowered her gaze, embarrassed but secretly proud. "I only did what had to be done." He stepped closer, his voice steady but fierce. "Don't sell yourself short. You were the reason we made it through. You're strong, and not just in body, strong in heart. That's rarer than gold out here." Her throat tightened. For the first time, she believed he might be right. That night, as the storm raged on outside, she lay awake under the quilts, listening to the thunder roll. Instead of feeling like too much, she felt, just for that night, like enough. Like she had finally proven what she was worth. But storms, she knew, did not only come from the sky. Others were brewing, carried on whispers and gossip, waiting to test her all over again. The storm passed, leaving the prairie washed clean, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth. The cattle grazed safely on the higher ground, the fences still held, and the ranch stood firm. For a brief moment she allowed herself to feel proud of the calf she had saved, proud of the strength she had given without hesitation, proud of standing shoulder to shoulder with Eli and not faltering. But peace never lasted long. A few days later, when the sun returned and the mud had dried into cracked earth, the neighbors began arriving. First, one rancher rode over to check the fences. Then another passed by, curious about how Eli had fared in the storm. At first, their voices carried ordinary questions, talk of cattle lost or spared, repairs needed, and supplies short. But soon, their eyes shifted toward her. She was carrying buckets of water from the well when she felt it, their stares sharp and heavy as stones. Their voices lowered, though not low enough to keep her from hearing. "Big one, isn't she?" one man muttered with a half-smirk. "Looks like she could haul more than 3 ranch hands put together." The other laughed, shaking his head. "What's Turner doing with her around? Ain't the kind of woman a man usually keeps. Folks'll talk." Her heart clenched. She lowered her gaze, gripping the handle of the bucket tighter. Later inside the cabin, she tried to shake it off. But the words clung like burrs, too big, not the kind of woman a man keeps. It was everything she had feared, spoken aloud by strangers who didn't even know her story. That evening, Eli returned from the pasture to find her packing what little she owned, the bundle of clothes, the worn blanket, the scraps she had carried with her on the day they cast her out. "What are you doing?" he asked, stepping into the doorway. "I can't stay," she said, her voice trembling. She didn't look at him, afraid of the truth she would see in his eyes. "Your neighbors, they talk. They say I don't belong here, that I'm not—" Her throat tightened. "Not the kind of woman a man like you should keep." Eli's face hardened, not with anger at her, but with something sharper. He stepped forward, his boots striking the wooden floor. "You heard gossip, and now you're ready to run? After everything we've been through?" Her hands stilled on the bundle. "You don't understand. I've heard those words all my life. From my own kin, from strangers in town, and now from your neighbors. It always ends the same. So before you say it too, I'll go." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Eli's jaw worked as he searched for the right words. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "No," he said firmly. Not this time. Not here. She finally looked up, startled by the steel in his voice. You think their words matter more than mine? Let me tell you something. Those men don't know strength when it's staring them in the face. They don't know heart. They only know small minds and smaller hearts. But I know better. Her breath caught. He stepped closer, his voice lowering but no less fierce. I don't give a damn what they say. You belong here because you've already proven yourself 100 times over. Not to them, to me. You've worked this ranch, saved my herd, stood in the storm without flinching. You think that's something I'd ever let walk away just because a fool whispered a word? Tears blurred her vision, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. But even as his words pierced through the wall of shame she carried, the doubt still lingered like a ghost. Could it be true? Could his voice be louder than all the others that had ever told her she was too big, too much, unworthy? For the first time in her life, she wanted desperately to believe someone, and Eli was not done proving it to her. The next morning, the gossip hadn't gone quiet. It had grown louder. Word spread across the prairie faster than a wildfire. Ranch hands from neighboring spreads lingered at the fence lines, whispering. Women in town clucked their tongues, glancing sideways whenever Eli rode in for supplies. Some laughed outright. Others spoke with pity as though Eli had made a mistake, taking in a woman like her. She felt every stare like a needle in her skin. Each word carved into her heart. Too big, too strong, not fit for a man like him. By midday, she could hardly breathe. She retreated into the barn, hiding among the bales of hay, afraid that Eli would finally hear the same poison and regret ever offering her shelter. But Eli was not blind. He saw the way she carried herself, the way her eyes stayed down, the way her hands shook when she thought he wasn't looking, and he saw the faces of the men who dared to laugh at her when she walked past. By evening, when the neighbors gathered outside the saloon in town, he decided enough was enough. He tied his horse to the post and stepped inside, his broad frame filling the doorway. The low murmur of voices fell to silence as every man looked his way. At the back table, the very ranchers whose words had cut her deepest leaned back in their chairs, smirking like boys caught in mischief. Well now, one of them drawled, if it ain't Turner himself. Heard you took in a woman built like a draft horse. Must be some reason, eh? Laughter rippled through the room. Eli's jaw tightened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked forward, his boots echoing against the wooden floor, and stopped right in the center of the room. You all have plenty to say about her, he began, his voice low, steady, and dangerous. But not one of you has the spine to say it where I can hear. So go on, say it now. The laughter faltered. A few men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Eli went on, his words cutting sharper than any blade. You call her too big? Then you've never seen real strength. You call her unfit? Then you've never seen a woman face down a storm, dragging calves from floodwater while some of you were cowering inside your homes. You mock her? That tells me more about you than it ever could about her. He paused, scanning the room, daring anyone to meet his gaze. I won't hear another word against her, he declared. Not in my presence, not behind my back. She's worth 10 of any man here, and I'll stand beside her till my last breath. You think I'm shamed by her? No, I'm honored. She belongs with me, and if any of you don't like it, you can choke on your own bitterness. Silence swallowed the room. A few men dropped their eyes. Others shifted as if stung by the truth. None dared to speak. Eli turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. His blood boiled, but beneath the anger was something deeper, a fierce pride, a vow made aloud for all to hear. When he returned to the ranch, she was waiting, worry etched into every line of her face. Where have you been? She asked softly. He looked at her, at the tears glistening in her eyes, at the way she tried to hide the pain those men's words had left. And he reached for her hands, rough and calloused but trembling in his. I told them, he said simply, all of them. You're mine. You belong here. And there's not a soul in this world that's going to take you from me. Her breath caught. The doubts inside her shifted, cracked, and for the first time, she felt the weight of them begin to fall away. Eli had not only chosen her in private, he had declared it before the world. And that changed everything. The days after Eli's stand felt different, lighter somehow, as if the air itself had been washed. The ranch carried on its steady rhythm of dawn chores and evening repairs, but there was a new ease between them. She moved through the tasks with a confidence that surprised her. The doubt that had hollowed her out seemed to shrink a little each morning. Eli watched that change with quiet pleasure, as if each small step she took proved something to him as much as to herself. Neighbors still glanced, and gossip never vanished completely, but the sharpness of it dulled. Folks who had once scoffed now nodded politely when Eli rode into town. Some came by the ranch with help or supplies, practical gestures that mattered more than words. The storm they'd weathered together had shifted the ledger. Deeds counted for more than cheap jokes. One evening, as the sun sank slow and gold behind the low hills, Eli found her on the porch, her hands folded in her lap, watching the cattle graze. He sat beside her without announcing himself. For a long moment they watched the same horizon, the quiet between them full and easy. "You've changed," he said, not as observation but as gratitude. She glanced at him, then down at her hands. "I'm learning not to disappear," she said. "Learning I can take up space without breaking everything." He turned to her, his face earnest in the fading light. "You ever worry you'll go back to hiding? That one wind of ugly talk'll push you right over the edge?" His voice was steady. He didn't want her to go. Never again. She thought of all the nights she'd rehearsed leaving, of the hollow ache that had been her constant companion. "I used to," she admitted. "I still do sometimes. But it's different now. I don't want to run anymore." Eli reached out and took her hand. His fingers closed around hers, calloused, warm, and wholly steady. "Then don't stay," he said simply. "Not because you owe me, not because you need to prove anything. Stay because you want to. Stay because this place is better with you in it." A laugh slipped out of her then, half disbelief, half joy. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," he agreed, "but it's worth it." He drew a slow breath. "I ain't one for fancy talk, but I'll say what I mean. I like you. I admire you. I love the way you stand firm when the world tries to knock you down. I love your laugh. I love how you saved that calf and didn't think twice. I love that you can beat me at loading hay, more often than I like to admit." Her cheeks warmed at the list of small truths, at how he noticed things that weren't about looks or size, but about who she was in the world. She squeezed his hand back, feeling the tide of feeling rise, hope, fear, longing, and something steadier. Trust. "If you—" she began, then stopped. Words had always been awkward bridges for her. She'd built stronger ways to show care. Eli read the hesitation in her face and smiled. "If you'll let me," he finished for her, "I'd like to make this official. Not because the world demands a name for it, but because I do." He rose, moving closer until she could feel the warmth of him. "Will you be mine?" Tears pricked her eyes, not from hurt now, but from a fullness she hadn't thought possible. She nodded, voice small. "Yes." He folded her into his arms like something precious. The embrace was nothing dramatic, no ceremony, no fanfare, only the simple, honest holding that stitches two lives together. She fit there in a way she never had, not small, not hidden, but wholly present. He rested his face against her hair and murmured the words she'd dreamed of and feared might never come. "You're perfect in my arms," he said. This time, when she let the words settle inside her, they didn't vanish like smoke. They stayed. They warmed her from the inside out. Around them, life on the ranch went on. Cattle lowing, wind sighing through the grass, neighbors tending their own plots. But in that quiet pocket of evening, the world felt right. The cruel voices of the past were still echoes, but they could no longer reach her with the same force. She had been cast out once for being too big. Now she was carried forward, chosen, defended, loved, and in Eli's arms she finally believed it.